So here I am, and we'll move into our final event of the day. And we're so happy to have Mark de St. Aubin. Did I say that right? He is a licensed clinical social worker and is currently serving as the Director of Community Education for Serenity Funeral Homes, and works closely with families for funeral arrangements, as well as providing bereavement following and follow-up care. Mark has previously worked in both home health and hospice, nursing homes, and has taught for 25 years as a faculty member of the University of Utah, instructing in the areas supporting needs of the chronically ill and the dying, and how to grieve. Such an important topic for us right now, and we appreciate you being with us and wrapping up our conference today. So we will turn the time over to you.
What a pleasure and honor it is, Heidi, Clea, and all of the at-home audience that is connected through our wonderful technology. Well, I know many of you have gone through this whole day learning so many wonderful things. As I looked at the program, I thought, wow, this is a lot to soak in. And I really compliment all of you for your commitment as a caregiver to reach out and learn and get support and find answers to questions and problems that you may be facing. I really admire the work that you do, because I've been a caregiver myself, and we'll share a little bit about that. But I want to compliment you on staying awake until 7 o'clock. This is amazing. And I know whatever you're taking, your Diet Coke, your cappuccinos, whatever it takes to stay awake, I appreciate it. So I do have a presentation that I'm going to share with you, and I'm going to ask Heidi and Clea to actually join me in sharing, let's see, some of this, or at least answering some of the questions that I may pose. So I'm going to start my slideshow here. And I'll need to ask Heidi and Clea, can you give me a thumbs up if you see my slides? Okay, great. So they've asked me to speak on a topic that's really, unfortunately, very timely, which is how do we grieve losses during this crazy COVID time? Some of these losses are very, very tied to our role as caregivers. And I am on the other side of this right now as a funeral worker. But prior to this, as you heard in my background, I've been in home health and hospice, and have also provided much care in my own family that I'll share a little bit with you. But that picture on the front is really demonstrative of kind of the dilemma that we're in. How do we, not only how do we grieve, but how do we care give during this COVID time? I don't know. I mean, I wish we could have a discussion among all of you, because I'm sure you would have some very powerful stories to share. And maybe during the chat, or excuse me, during the presentation, you can type a question or a comment in the chat page, and either Clea or Heidi can tune into those and share those with me at some point. So let's get started. I thought I would share my own story. So you can see my picture up there, upper left, playing a tin whistle. I love music. I was a music major for 2 days at Florida State. And then when I saw how long people were having to sit in the practice room playing their instruments, I said, I'm not sure I want to do this the rest of my life. One of my best friends is my dog, that you might even hear during our presentation tonight, if he decides to to speak to a neighbor. That's Leo in the photo. The next photo, the black and white, is a wedding picture of my dear parents, Leo and Olive. My father died when I was 7 suddenly from a heart attack, and my mother died while she was on hospice care. And I helped assisted in providing care for her. And so that's part of my story. The other picture on the upper right is my own personal caregiver, my wife. And her name is Lorene. She's a hospice chaplain. So we get it on both sides here. My bottom left is our daughter Olivia with my wife and I, and then Anna, our other daughter, and then the picture on the bottom right photo is my mother-in-law, Ruth, and she lived till she was 98. And my wife and I gave her care for about 5 years when she lived across the street, and then when she went to an assisted living. So we have some taste of what caregiving entails, and I'm really that's why I honor each of you. So what is caregiving? If you were to put that question out and maybe even ask for a definition, you can even type that in if you want on the chat page. I'm curious about what you would say caregiving is. Is it something is it a responsibility? Is it an opportunity? Is it a burden? Is it a joy? What is caregiving? And I think maybe it's all of the above, if you know what I mean. So
we had someone in the chat that said love. Caregiving is love. And
is
that's
love.
exactly what I was thinking.
Oh, good. Wonderfully spoken. Well, we call them our loved ones, right? Now, often caregiving is a mix of everything, isn't it? It's the love we have, and it's the frustration that this person who is so dependent upon us, why do they have to ask for the same thing every 5 minutes, right? If they have dementia or other, Alzheimer's disease, why do they have to keep repeating themselves? Why do they embarrass me in front of my friends? Why this, why that? So in addition to love and joy, it can be very frustrating. So,
Can I give you a few other definitions?
yes, please share.
Doing things for someone that they can't do for themselves any longer. It's an opportunity to serve and a calling.
I love that.
All of those are
so what I hear from many of you is that you really draw from things deep within you. In many ways, service is like you say, a calling. In other words, from God, or from providence, or we have been served by this loved one these many years, particularly during our being raised, if they're a parent, right? A mother or father. And so we have this debt that we have to give back to them. I know I felt that way with both my mother and my mother-in-law. So that's wonderful. And the deeper we're anchored in our reason for caregiving, the more enlivening it can be, and the less burnout we'll experience. I will say that when we're connected with our source, it really makes a difference. So is it easy? Is caregiving easy? Thumbs up? Yes?
I know.
Thumbs down? Thumbs in between? Right, I think so too. Well, this moment looks, yeah, up and down. Okay, that's good. So this moment looks like it's easy. It's a joy. It's hugging my loved one. Well, or is it hard? When the person that we care for, the loved one, doesn't recognize us, or thinks we are an intruder, or thinks that we have stolen something from them, then it becomes more difficult, right? Then it requires really coping skills and an ability to somehow redefine this relationship that we once had with them as times and conditions change, right? So how did you find your, how would I put this? How did you find yourself caring for your loved one? Were you, were you arm twisted? Are you the only one in your family that can care for them? Do you have brothers and sisters who live out of state and you're left, the only one to provide care? Or are you a spouse, the only spouse? And how you answer that question is very important in how you hold this role that you have as a caregiver, whether it's an opportunity or a burden, or whether it's something of your own volition, something of your own free will. And again, the more we can choose this role, and it may be something you have to choose every day. Okay, you get up in the morning and you think, oh my gosh, I've got to do all these things, but I am going to choose to do them either cheerfully or volitionally. That has a very, that will help keep you resilient as a caregiver and less resentful. So how you choose this role is very important. So what are the gains and benefits of caregiving, giving care? I like this picture. I have some friends who are at a facility here in town, and I worked with the woman. She's probably in her 70s now. I worked with her for about 8 years, and her name is Bev, and she is a doll. And whenever I see her, or whenever I used to see her before COVID, I would dance with her and sing with her and just show her that I loved her, because she remembered that I was familiar, even though she didn't remember my name. I think benefits and gains that come from caregiving have a renewing and nourishing effect, don't they? But there are also some challenges and losses, which we've talked about. And so now let's turn our attention now to how we deal with and grieve those losses, whether it's an anticipated loss of the loss of a loved one that we're caring for, or the loss after they have passed. So my background is in grief and loss, and that's why I do grief work for a Serenity Funeral Home. And I taught at the university for about 12 years a class called Clinical Practice with Grief and Loss. And so I used to teach our social work students how to do grief counseling. So it's really a part of me about how, and frankly, a simple way to say what grief is a different form of love. Grief is the form that love takes when we don't have that person with us. So grief springs right from love. So how do we love when we're losing someone, or when we have lost someone during this time of separation of COVID? It's such a challenge. So, you see this glass that separates. I don't know if any of you have loved ones you've had to place in a care facility, whether it's an assisted living or a skilled nursing facility, but just the glass itself speaks to the fact that we are having to separate ourselves from those that we love. And what happens when we have to stay at a distance? What happens to that relationship? You can put a comment in the chat. What happens to your relationship with your loved one if you've had to place them in a care center or an assisted living facility?
I know that
even for a time.
Many people we talk to have a sense of failure, that they're not taking the right care of their loved one. And that's tough.
Oh my gosh, like you've abandoned your loved one.
Right.
You feel, oh my gosh, feel a sense of helplessness.
Right.
Hey, Mark.
Yes, Clea, please.
This last week, we had to decide if we were going to put Grandma in a care facility, and it was so gut-wrenching to ask ourselves, will she last through COVID? Will we ever be able to touch her again? And we were actually trying to balance, would we ever be able to touch her again, or do you think she'll make it through the spring? And it was horrible. It was horrible.
Gosh. Oh,
so,
Clea, I am so sorry. I am so sorry for that. That's a very real and powerful dilemma that actually it's a no-win. I mean, it's really a tough, you can't win when you're put against the wall with that kind of a choice. And I hope.
And it makes you think that, should I bring her here and take care of her and throw my whole life in the air and say to heck with it, just because the thought of the alternative of never being able to be with her again in person. It's just a unique, horrifying situation.
And you have put words beautifully, Clea, to what many of you caregivers are probably experiencing. Because if you're a healthy and smart caregiver, you need to know when your limit has arrived, and even before your limit has arrived. In other words, you need to know when you need to cry uncle, when you can't do this anymore, because it should not be an expectation that you have, that you are a 24/7, that you are taking the place of 3 8-hour shifts of caregivers, professional caregivers. And so there does need to be, I like your hands there, Clea, you need to balance things, and actually getting someone to consult with you is very helpful, whether it's a home care professional like a medical social worker, or the facility that you're considering, one of their staff, their director of nursing or a social worker, something like that, to counsel with you, to help you have realistic expectations of yourself rather than unrealistic, because that will not bode well. So how have you modified the care that the way you give care, so that you can still provide emotional support for your loved one's needs, personal care, and contact when they're in a health facility? So those are big questions, and you're welcome to chime in on the chat page if you like. What changes have you had to make in order to give the care that your loved one needs?
One of our listeners wrote in that loss of having someone in the care facility and not being able to take care of them is called ambiguous loss.
It is. It's called ambiguous loss.
Ambiguous loss.
That's right. And the reason it's ambiguous loss is because you don't get a sympathy card for that kind of loss. They're not physically present, but they are very much in your mind and heart. So how do you grieve something when they're still very psychologically present? It's hard. It's an ambiguous, an ambivalent loss. Very well put. Thank you for that, for identifying that, whoever that was. Any other comments, Heidi?
We had a gentleman that wrote in and said at 83, it was a joy for him to look after his wife after her stroke, but age, strength, and lack of sleep took its toll. And he was the only support and help that she had.
Oh my gosh.
He eventually had to make that very hard decision to have her transferred to a long-term care facility. And he ends with saying, do I grieve about her being away from me more than I can ever describe in words?
You know, you froze in the last sentence. Can you repeat that?
He said, do I grieve about her being away from me? And he ends with more than I can ever describe in words.
Right. We'll talk about your grief and give you some ideas of ways to address that. Thank you for your courage to know that you did have your limits, and there are ways that you can address your sorrow. Thank you for sharing, for your courage to share. So let's continue. Have you used technology to stay in touch with them? My guess is that those who are on this Zoom call probably have, or that you've used technology with your loved one for them to connect with faraway ones. So the question, has this been awkward? Yes. It's awkward for us professionals who use it every day, right? I mean, Heidi gave her whole beautiful introduction about me to no one because nobody listened. So it is awkward, right? It's very awkward. But and how has your older adult loved one been able to navigate? So my guess is that we're all in this learning curve. So this is one adaptive, just your ability to be here tells me that you are a resilient caregiver. Your ability to connect electronically tells me that you are resilient and adaptive, and you have what it takes. So what concerns do you have in caregiving this way? Well, let's with our full attention now. COVID pandemic and its collective impact on grief and loss. All of us are part of what we call collective anxiety and fear, even call it collective grief. We have a societal anticipation of the spread of the pandemic. We're now in the second wave, right? That fear and collective anxiety can be debilitating. And I'm not saying this to make it worse. I'm saying this so we can put words on it, put words on feelings that all of us have at times. So we anticipate the spread. We anticipate care facilities being overwhelmed, particularly if you're a caregiver, professional caregiver, a nurse or a CNA in those facilities. Or we have anticipatory grief of loved ones' imminent death. So this is a collective, this is almost layered, and it gets worse if we watch the news, if you know what I'm talking about, right? Watching the news is almost a painful exercise in getting anxious. At least it is for me at times. So collective grief. Some families have experienced multiple losses. I don't know. My guess is that as caregivers out there, you have probably gone through a time in your life when you have had more than one death that you've had to hold. And sometimes we call that bereavement overload, or we call it cumulative grief, where it's been layered upon layered. And what ends up often happening in those cases is that we start to grieve the first loss, and before we can really begin to do our grief work, the second one comes and we're put back into shock, which happens immediately after any death, right? And then we start to grieve that one a little bit, and then another loss. And sometimes those losses aren't always death losses, but it can be a loss like the gentleman said, having our loved one go to a facility, we're grieving that, right? And then at some point, our loved one passes, there's grief on that. Then we have to maybe lose our home. We can't take care of ourselves. That's another loss. So these losses can be layered, and it presents some challenges. Communities have been devastated, as we've seen in New York City and other communities. Lost lives of other care providers on the healthcare teams. And we talked about these layers of loss. Death, financial security is a loss, or insecurity, loss of social connection. All of us are feeling, this distancing, this social distancing is a loss. And I don't know about you, but my body gets hungry for a hug. I mean, I have my dog Leo and my wife Florine, but I miss just the contact that I have, and that has an effect on me. Loss of my own autonomy to move about. I decide when I'm going to go to the store, when it's safe to go to the store. All these things are losses. loss of my ability, loss of your ability to visit your loved one who is sick or afflicted. And then finally, after their passing, many of us lose the ability to memorialize. So in my work with Serenity Funeral Home, we've had to, many families have chosen very brief cremation services with no one attending. And they feel badly because their loved one didn't get the funeral they deserved, right? And no one could visit. So we've had services, and many of you have experienced this, where people who that loved one who has passed, who their love has touched my life, but I can't give that love and support back to the bereaved. So these are very unusual and powerfully penetratingly difficult times to go through these experiences. And then, of course, traumatic impact. We could speak of the bad news, like we talked about the news overload. Healthcare workers experiencing the death of many of their folks, helplessness to combat the disease, doctors and healthcare workers. So how do all of us respond to these changes and the practices? Let's talk about this. So we're trying to adapt. We're trying to connect electronically. We're trying to socially distance, as you see in that graveside service on the bottom. Well, we've talked about family members unable to be at the bedside of our dying loved ones. Physical expressions of love and support are reduced or non-existent. Technology is at times an imperfect substitute for physical presence or embrace. Delays in receiving updated information. Loved ones dying alone. It's very, very terrible and sad. Lack of compassionate touch around the time of death. All of us are afraid to touch one another, and we grieve alone. And then difficult to have closing funeral rituals. And then diminished support for the bereaved. So these are like all these different points make it a challenge for those of us who are grieving. Now, this is a reminder about grief. Grief is a normal, disruptive response to the severing or the ending of someone or something to which we are deeply attached. Think of our body's response to an injury, like a twisted knee or an ankle. Our body swells up. It has pain, increased blood flow, all very disruptive, but necessary. So I want to underline that word necessary. So grieving and the emotional response that we have is necessary after a loss. It is another form of our love for these people that we have become connected to. So how do we grieve? Well, excuse me, how might COVID affect our grief? So these are points that a grief counselor might consider with you. We have a disbelief or difficulty in accepting our loved one's death because we can't be present. So they died in a nursing home or a facility, and we weren't able to visit. Somehow the reality of that death doesn't impress powerfully enough on us to convince our denial or our disbelief that this is real. So the reality, it's hard to accept the full reality of the death of a loved one when we can't be present. We have, as has been mentioned, feelings of guilt or remorse about abandoning them when we couldn't visit. Or if we take them home and we were unable to provide adequate 24/7 care, we might have guilt and remorse, as Clea mentioned earlier. Family members are often left in this in-between state called a liminal state of having been informed of a death but not having clear plans for what to do with their loved one's remains, their body. There's a sense of what's called depersonalization and emotional detachment from life and others as everything is put on hold. I don't know about you, but our lives are put on hold in many ways. And so there's this detached sense of reality. So putting our grief on hold causes many of us to put our celebration or our funeral after, and many folks I know have not even been able to have their closure or their goodbye to their loved one, even for the last 6 to 8 months. So unfinished business stays unfinished, or it can. So we are at risk due to all of the above for what's called complicated grief. We're not going to talk a lot about that, but if you feel that your grief is stuck in some ways or might be, I would encourage you, you're actually welcome to reach out to me. I know other folks that do grief support in the community. So I want to cover just briefly some myths that are associated with grief. That all losses are the same. This is a myth. These are not true. Time heals all. If we feel sorry for ourselves, or we start to feel sorrow, that we're just having a pity party, right? Or it's best to put painful things out of our mind. That's not true. Or you shouldn't be angry. Allow feelings to be present. Or another myth is that we feel like it's sinful to ask God why. Well, we have to remember that Job asked God why. Jesus on the cross asked God why. Maybe we can too, that, or we say children should be protected from grief and death. That's also not, that's a myth. Or that being upset means that we lack faith. Or feeling like we just need to keep busy. That's putting grief on the shelf. And in order to get through it, we have, in order to get on the other side of it, we have to go through it. So we can't just put it on the shelf by distracting ourselves. Or saying that grief proceeds in predictable, orderly stages. Not true. Or that we ignore our grief. If I don't let myself think about it, it'll go away. I encourage folks who believe that to give themselves 10 or 15 minutes a day or more, but put a timer on it and let themselves go into their bedroom, lock the door, put a pillow over their head and sob. But when that 15 minutes is up, it's time to put your grief away. At least you're giving it a time to be experienced. The goal of grief is to get over it. Nope, you won't get over it. You'll get over it if you get over your love for that person, and that never happens. So likely you'll always have grief, but it will be experienced differently. It won't be a sharp pain, but it will be, gosh, I miss them, right? Or you feel like you should only feel sadness. Some people feel anger, guilt, anxiety, loneliness. Sadness may be only one thing. Or it's important for me to be strong for the rest of the family. That's a myth. You don't need to be strong. Actually, modeling sadness and healthy grieving is really healthy for everybody. So here are some truths associated with grief. When you've experienced the loss of a loved one, you can expect to grieve. There's no right or wrong way. Your grief is unique, no timeline. It'll probably take longer and be harder than expected, so be patient and compassionate with yourself, right? It's likely you might not receive the support or understanding that you need or expect from others. So you need to select the people, that you can count on for your grief support. Often men and women grieve differently. I like to say, you got to feel it to heal it. Acute or recent grief may make you feel like you're going crazy. You're not going crazy. You are entering into a world that is without your loved one, which is a very different world than what you've lived with for a long time. Talking with a non-judgmental, trusted other is very helpful. That can accept you wherever you are, whatever you're feeling. Expect that you'll feel a multitude of emotions. Ritual is often helpful because it gives symbolic expression to your deepest needs. And allow a search for meaning. Posing questions like why often stimulates growth in the process of your search. Beautiful. So what can I do to handle my grief? so you could connect with other people. So invite people to call you or host conference calls on Zoom with family members or friends to stay connected. Ask people to share stories and pictures with you of your loved one on email, phone, or chat so that you are reminded of this person. We don't want to forget them, and they want to have a way to express their memories to you as well. So if you could tell your loved ones, gosh, share some pictures that you have of George, or my sister, if you would, because their stories, those are precious to me. Coordinate a date and time for people to honor your loved one, even if you're just reciting a poem, spiritual reading, or prayer within your own house. Beautiful way to connect. Create memories or rituals. Some people have done what's called a memory book or a blog or a web page where they invite other people to contribute memories and stories. Often funeral homes such as Serenity, we have one for our decedents and their families. Take part in an activity like planting a tree or preparing a favorite meal that means something to your loved one and who died. I love this, write a letter or a song to them, or choose a song that reminds you of them and play it and cry and let yourself celebrate their life and the exquisiteness of your love for them. Plan an event after COVID. So if you may not be able to hold a memorial service now, plan something, put it on the calendar. Even in the meantime, hold a special dinner or gathering with close friends that you feel safe with. You can write letters or voice recordings, allow for needed safety, which allows for needed safety for some. Suggest, this is a suggestion in writing a letter, actually. And this is more for what we call unfinished business. We'll talk about that. Writing a letter to a loved one who has died that you still feel like you've abandoned them, or some unfinished business. You can say what you never understood was in the letter, or what I need you to know is I did my best. This is a letter that you write out physically. The one question I've wanted to ask you is, will you forgive me? Or, will you tell me whatever? Or I feel ready to change our relationship by, that's for someone who is still alive that you're wanting to do some work with. Or some suggestions, seeking help from others. Seek out grief counseling or mental health services, support groups. Serenity has a Zoom-based group. Bill Cox from Rocky Mountain Care has a Zoom-based grief group. So does Rocky Mountain Healthcare here in Salt Lake City. So there are ways, even during COVID, that you can connect and get support for grief online. Seeking support from faith-based organizations is helpful, or trusted friends. So what if I feel that I have abandoned my loved one during COVID time? How might I handle some unfinished business? These are just some suggestions. So COVID is actually creating a lot of unfinished business. And we've talked about this. Inability to provide care or do the kind of memorial services our loved ones have needed. So these are thoughts shared by Bill Cox, my friend. He said there are 4 things that matter most. And these can be put in a letter or some type of statement. Please forgive me, or I forgive you. Thank you. I love you. As you're doing work on unfinished business, listen to your heart. What is your heart telling you about how to heal that wound that you may have, or the feelings inside of you? Prior to your loved one's passing, if you have unfinished business, remember you only get this one chance to deal with it, one life. Take this moment and maybe ask for some help to address some things that are that are unsettled that you would regret after your loved one has died. Advanced directives conversations with a family can help get things started on hard topics. And this can be helpful in addressing unfinished business as well. These are some suggestions from other colleagues. Encourage your care recipient to tell their personal stories to the family. So, for example, this can facilitate their opening up and dealing with things with family members that might be still unfinished. Sensing your own mortality as a caregiver while seeing your loved one dying may prompt you to begin to look at your own unfinished business with your loved one. In other words, realizing that your life will end. That prompts many of us to say, I'm going to take this moment and resolve issues that otherwise would not be resolved. Encourage a loved one to finish a quilt for their grandchild, write down all their family recipes never shared, or personal or family stories or secrets, so unanswered questions can be put to rest. These are just some thoughts that my colleagues have shared. Sometimes an impulse to do a medical push to try everything, try one more treatment, may just be our impulse to delay or postpone our need to address things with our loved ones. So just remember that. Guidelines for those of us still living regarding unfinished business. Lived life deliberately, intentionally. I love this quote by Thoreau. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discovered that I had not lived. Ask yourself, what is left undone in my life? Does anything need to be said or done in order for me to feel complete, peaceful, or fulfilled? Do something today about what nags and bothers you, especially in your relationships with your care recipient. Keeping your own death and passing in mind will help you act with fuller awareness of the preciousness of each moment and the person who is in front of you. So I've shared with you a slide that hopefully you can get a copy of. What makes for a good funeral or memorial? There's a sense of reality with the person who has died being present with us. We recall, we come together to share memories. We get support from other loved ones. We have the chance to express our inward grief by mourning, outwardly expressing that grief. A good funeral affords us a chance to express our sadness, our relief, our yearning, and in a collective and vocal way. It gives us a chance to seek for meaning. Did the person I love have a good life? What is life anyway? Why do we die? Is there a bigger picture that transcends all of this? A funeral gives us a time to ask such questions and hold these in our hearts and begin to find answers to them. And then, of course, transcendence. Funerals invite us to ask ourselves what we value most. How do we want to spend our limited time in mortality? And give us a chance to embrace the mystery and wonder of life and death and remind us how precious life is. I love this. This is from Alan Wolfelt. Some other material that we can share. Why is a funeral so important? And funerals during COVID. Just some links that I've shared with you. Well, it's been wonderful to be with you all tonight. And I honor the work. Oh, you hear my beeper just went off. I honor the work each of you do each and every moment, every minute that you provide care for your loved ones. So thank you for coming and listening. And I hope it's been beneficial. I wish it could have been more mutual, interactive, mutually interactive. But in the meantime, if you have a chat, if you have a question or anything you'd like to share, please send it to Heidi or Clea, and we have 15 minutes to discuss things.
I want to
love to do that.
Shared on the chat. Older adults love mail. So don't forget that that's an opportunity for us to reach out. So this individual would send her mother-in-law postograms, which is an app, a
Oh my
few
gosh.
times a week.
I love that.
A photo she uploads from her phone along with a short paragraph.
Oh my gosh.
And then lots of phone calls from family can help
Oh,
feel connected.
oh, that's so beautiful. Please continue.
She indicates she still does this for her aunt who has dementia. She has a ritual to get the mail every day and hides them so nobody can take them from her.
Oh,
So that's great. There's
that's great. That's great.
another way to reach out.
Right. Keep reading. Keep reading those, Clea and Heidi, please.
And then Clea was so kind to put a note that she had a neighbor and how much it meant to her when she had a dear neighbor remember the anniversary of her son's death. How that was more significant to her than anything anyone did for me in the weeks after his passing. And how
That is so beautiful.
That is so beautiful.
Clea, thank you for sharing that. Those anniversaries and birth dates of the loved ones are times for when our heart erupts, when we have these waves of grief pass over us, and we're just yearning for someone to still remember our loved one, our son in your case, and the impact that your son had on that person's life. It is such a powerful way to honor them and to honor your grief and to give it a place to be held. That's so beautiful. Thank you, Clea.
A question was asked, how does one deal with resentment when other family members do not share in the care?
Right. Often, so there are there are messages that need to be communicated in families. Now, as a medical social worker, I spent time holding what are called family conferences. And during those conferences, it was my role to advocate for the necessity of sharing the load of care. And actually, the reason for that is it prevents not only resentment, but it prevents burnout and breakdown, because the person who's shouldering that whole load is going to say, I can't do it anymore, or I won't do it anymore, or I won't have anything to do with this anymore. And so the person to self-advocate or to ask for help to advocate for yourself so that your what we call caregiver burden is not so extreme and that it's shared. So we can handle resentment one of two ways. We can forgive others, but that doesn't change the situation. See, this is an unfair allotment of care in your place. So if something is unfair, it's one thing to forgive these people, but that's not what needs to happen. What needs to happen is that someone needs to rise up, either yourself or someone to help you hold a family meeting and then schedule things. And you're welcome to call me. I can give you names of geriatric care managers that can come into your home and actually set up a family conference, a family council, where these things are carved out and say, okay, these are all of the caregiving responsibilities and tasks that need to be handled. How are we going to divide those up among all of us? Now, it sometimes takes a lot of work. So how to handle resentment? Internally, you can forgive, but still that doesn't manage the injustice of caregiving. So I would actually take action in this case and either reach out for support. Well, often it's best to do that. Let's see, another question.
How can we start writing letters to those we will leave behind? Like an ethica will or legacy letters? You heard of those?
Yes. So letters to those we leave behind are beautiful ways of actually reaching across the veil, if you want to put it that way, and particularly opening up our own heart to forgive or to seek forgiveness or to make amendments, restitution for offenses that have been had. So letter writing, and I would just address it, dear loved one, and I would say exactly how you feel. Encourage people to speak their heart and write down what they wish they could have said if their loved one were there and willing to hear some of what needs to be said. And then I take it a step further sometimes, and I encourage my folks that I work with to put a picture of their loved one on a chair in front of them and then read that letter to them. And boy, does the feeling come out. And the letter is more for our own unfinished business, getting our own heart healed. But how powerful that is, because otherwise we'll carry issues and unresolved, the grind of this anger or resentment or offenses that have been made. And honestly, maybe one letter won't create a complete healing, but it will be an opening. And if you work with a good counselor, myself, I do grief counseling with folks who address these kinds of unfinished business, or other mental health counselors or grief counselors, sometimes a pastoral person, a clergy of some kind, if they're trained in pastoral counseling, can help in the forgiveness area. These can be resources. Let's continue our chat questions. Please read and bring those up to me. I'm not as nimble. I can't hear you, Heidi, because you're muted again.
Hey, Mark, really quick.
Clea.
Yeah, can I just share this resource real quick? That's really amazing.
Please.
I put the link in the chat. It's Stanford. It's called a 7 Tasks of Life Review in Minutes. And so you go to that website, and the 7 tasks are: acknowledge the important people in your life, remember treasured moments from your life, apologize to those who you love if you hurt them, forgive those who love you if they have hurt you, express gratitude for all the love and care you have received, tell your friends and family how much you love them, and take a moment to say goodbye. There's a separate letter for if you're terminally or if you have a significant illness.
Wow.
And what I like about this is it's a template that you can actually click on it, fill in the blanks, and it will spit out a letter that you can just kind of refine. So you don't have to think too much about it. You know what I mean?
I love that.
So,
right. Oh, that's a great resource. That's a great. Is that from Stanford?
It is.
That's Stanford link.
Yep.
Oh my gosh,
it's called the Life Review Letter.
Oh, yeah. That is so great. Someone asked for my phone number. You can call Serenity Funeral Home at 801-255-2801, or you can connect. I've left my email address on the PowerPoint, the first slide. Thank you for defining why I need to have a birthday party with my family on my mom's birthday. Yes, for the past 17 years. This is a chat question. I don't know what I will do this year because of COVID, but I have a definite need to remember her. Yay. Wonderful. Wonderful.
And then we're right at our closing time, but just to wrap up, there's just been a beautiful conversation back and forth with two people about how much it means when someone remembers someone who you've loved and lost. And in those first days when you have the funeral, you have support, but in the next 3 months or 1 year,
right. The casseroles stop coming.
You're on your own. And so those are the times when they need friends and family to reach out and remember that they're still feeling pain and they're still feeling loss.
Beautiful.
So I've loved that, and thank you.
Oh, that is so great. I see that we have over 50 people attending tonight.
Yes.
You guys are my heroes.
Isn't
You
that
are
amazing?
my heroes.
I
I love, I wish I could go and give you each, in fact, let's do it. I'm going to give you each a virtual high five.
There you go.
Reach up to the screen. Give me a virtual high five. You too, Heidi. Come on, Clea.
There you
Give
go.
me a high five, Clea. Okay, good. All right, that's good.
I wanted to say thank you so much for ending our conference and for being with us. Clea, for you to
Thank
stay
you.
and take care.
Thank you. Wow, a standing ovation.
To give a final message to caregivers. November, I don't know if we've mentioned today, but November is National Caregiving Month. And so how appropriate to hold a conference
Beautiful.
to our purpose
Beautiful.
is to give you resources, but it is also to honor you for the work that you do every day and for the love and compassion and gifts
Wow.
that you give to others of yourselves and your time. And I know that often you feel like you're alone, but I want you to know there are millions of caregivers in the United
Oh my
States
gosh.
that are making an impact. And just appreciate so much how the love that you give and the inspiration that you are to so many of us. So thank you all for joining us, for all of our speakers. We have staff that has been terrific. So thank you to everyone for just a beautiful day. I wish we could do it
Wow.
all again tomorrow.
Wow. Wow. I wish all of you safety and good health and resilience and the courage to apply what you learned today. What powerful things. I want to thank Clea and Heidi and all the team, the panel, the creators of this virtual conference. Wonderful event. Wonderful. Thank you so much for reaching out and creating it for all of us.
Clea, did you have any final thoughts?
Well, we just finally got the hang of the chat, I feel, in the last couple sessions. I think we should go again. We should do it again another day, and we'll all be friends. I mean, I feel like Nancy and I need to go out for lunch.
I have a question.
No.
Will my slides be available to those who have attended?
Yes, and I wanted to just wrap up and say that we have recorded sessions. We will be making those available to everyone who registered. And
Wonderful.
so we will provide, if we don't have your slides, we'll reach out and get those from you.
Okay.
And yeah,
Please
we
do.
appreciate you and Clea and just everyone. That's last message. Caregivers are the bomb. There you go. I couldn't have said it better. Thanks to everyone.
That's great. Take care.
Wonderful.
Bye-bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone. Thank you for coming.
Goodbye.
We love you.
Yeah, love to everyone. And bye, Clea. Thank you all so much.
Heartful hearts.